Imagine you're, I don't know, hacking your way through this incredibly dense jungle, right? You step into an ancient crumbling temple, you brush away the vines, and you find the flawless, intricate blueprint for a modern silicon microchip carved right into the stone wall.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That is essentially the massive, like, cognitive collision sitting on the desk in front of us today. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Today we're looking at a stack of sources that absolutely shouldn't belong in the same room, let alone be, having a direct conversation with each other.
It really is deeply jarring to read because on one side of the desk, we have the absolute bleeding edge of modern computational topology. So we're talking about heavily mechanized mathematical ledgers, strict topological proofs, algorithmic physics, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then on the other side, we have the Nag Hammadi library.
Which is wild.
Exactly. These are ancient Gnostic texts from, the 2nd to 4th centuries CE,
Well,
documents buried in jars in the Egyptian desert, just full of mystics and divine emanations and all this ancient cosmology.
and the mathematical ledger is putting forward this radical premise. The sources call it the invariant observation hypothesis. It is literally attempting to mathematically prove that these entirely disjoint fields,
Completely disconnected.
yeah, completely, whether it's high-frequency trading algorithms, oncology, quantum physics, or ancient desert mysticism, they are all describing the exact same underlying geometry of reality.
And what's fascinating here is that it requires a massive perspective shift right out of the gate. Like, to even engage with this, we have to stop looking at the Nag Hammadi library as religious dogma or, narrative mythology.
Right, like we usually would.
Exactly. The mathematical sources treat these ancient documents as highly compressed information packets. They are viewed as pure structural data about the universe. It's just, well, it's simply wrapped in the language and the metaphors of the time.
Okay, let's unpack this because that begs the question. How on earth did a group of 2nd century mystics living in the literal desert perfectly document the mathematical geometry of the universe without a single supercomputer? To answer that, we have to look at the one thing connecting them, which is the numbers.
Yeah. And the ledger defines this specific connection as topological convergence. Because across all of these completely disconnected traditions, we see 4 recurring structural constants popping up over and over.
Just everywhere.
Everywhere. We see the number 1, which represents the departure or the monad. Then the number 3, representing the triad. The number 4, the luminary or dimensional supports. And finally, the number 12, representing the eon or the structural columns.
Okay, so I'm trying to picture this mathematically for those listening. Why those specific numbers, if we're talking about geometry, are these numbers functioning kind of like the architectural load-bearing walls of reality?
That is a brilliant way to frame it, actually, yes. The formal proofs outline something called the Peruvian architect principle.
Okay.
It features this massive computational matrix demonstrating the probability of 9 entirely disconnected domains, so fields as distant as high-frequency trading and ancient Manichaeism, independently choosing the exact number 1 for a structural departure.
And the probability is?
Roughly 10 to the negative 16th power.
10 to the negative 16th. Let me just ground that for you listening. That is a decimal point, followed by 15 zeros, and then a 1. I mean, winning the lottery is basically a statistical guarantee compared to that.
Oh, absolutely. And the inverse of that vanishingly small probability is formalized in the proofs as the JFC constant.
The JFC constant.
Right. This mathematical certainty entirely refutes what they call the independence hypothesis. It completely destroys the idea that these are just, independent human stories that coincidentally share favorite numbers.
Right, like, oh, we all just like the number 3.
Exactly. Instead, it proves the invariant observation hypothesis. These traditions are reporting on the exact same underlying state space of reality. The math actually calls this the homology of religion.
Homology of religion. Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. So are we talking about taking the the cultural skin off a belief system and finding that the underlying skeleton is mathematically identical to a physics equation?
Yes. Let's use a physical object to explain homological isomorphism because it helps clarify things. Think of a coffee mug and a classic donut.
Okay, breakfast items. Got it.
Right. Now, to a topologist, those are the exact same shape.
Wait, really? A mug and a donut?
Because they both have exactly one hole. The narrative dressing, whether it holds hot coffee or is covered in sugar glaze, that does not matter to the math. The underlying structure is identical.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see.
So while the specific characters, the dogmas, the settings of different religions change, their structural wholes, which represent systemic failures, and their boundaries, which represent truths, are mathematically indistinguishable.
So the Gnostic monad is just the homological primitive of connectedness.
Exactly.
And the mother figure, Sophia, is just the homological concept of cycles. They converge on 1, 3, 4, and 12 because they're measuring the exact same layers of the universe's geometry.
They're all just donuts and coffee mugs in different disguises, essentially.
I have to jump in with a skeptical pushback here, though, because I know you, listening to this, are probably thinking the exact same thing I am. Isn't it just human nature to look for patterns?
Sure.
Like, we like the number 3 because
Yeah.
we experience time as past, present, and future. We like 12 because of the lunar cycles in a year. How do we know this isn't just some universal psychological quirk? Are we just mapping our human bias onto the math?
It's a fair question, but the sources anticipate that exact skepticism. They address it with a proof called topological Lucas dynamics.
Okay, what is that?
It demonstrates that this is not psychology at all. It is fundamental geometry dictating state-space cardinality. And state-space cardinality is just a fancy way of saying the total number of possible configurations a system can have.
Okay, so how does that prove the numbers aren't just all in our heads?
Well, the source looks at what happens when you take a linear system, like let's say an open carbon chain of molecules, right, which is governed by the Fibonacci sequence, and you physically bend it into a closed ring like a cycloalkane. The moment you close that loop, changing its boundary conditions, the math instantly shifts from Fibonacci numbers to Lucas numbers.
Just by connecting the two ends?
Just by connecting the ends. This Lucas gain, as they call it, happens in cryptography. It happens in fluid dynamics. It happens in quantum walks. The numbers dictate the reality of a closed loop versus an open line.
Oh, I see.
Your brain doesn't decide that a closed loop operates on a different mathematical law. The geometry of the universe does. We are just living inside the geometry.
Wow. So the moment a structure closes into a loop, the universe basically upgrades its mathematical operating system. That is wild.
It really is.
But, that brings us right back to the historical impossibility we started with. If these numbers dictate reality, how on earth did the ancients decode the operating system?
The ledger explains this using a theorem operating across what they call universal amnesia. You can sort of think of it like the classic monkey at the typewriter thought experiment, but it's functioning on a cosmic systemic scale.
So if I bang on my keyboard long enough, I won't just write a terrible screenplay. I'll eventually type out the mathematical invariant of the cosmos. Good to know my typos have a cosmic purpose.
Well, you would, but with a critical caveat here. The universe goes through continuous erasures, or what the text calls ticks.
Ticks, like a clock.
Yeah, think of them as systemic resets. Over infinite cycles, an agent, your metaphorical monkey making random stochastic choices, keeps typing. But the typewriter's keys are rigged by the invariant law of the universe.
Rigged how?
The underlying geometry dictates what is actually capable of surviving the next reset. Because the keys are mathematically rigged, the probability of the agent eventually typing the exact structural description of the universe approaches 1.0.
It just becomes a mathematical inevitability.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, actually. I love the analogy the sources use here for what they call highly folded invariants. I picture it like river stones.
Oh, yeah, that's a great visual.
Right. When you walk by a river, you don't find perfectly smooth, round stones because the river, wants to make art. The river has no intention.
None at all.
You get smooth stones because the chaotic, violent tumbling of the water continuously erodes every single jagged edge over centuries. The smooth stone is simply the mathematically most stable shape that can actually survive the friction of the water.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that violent erosion is exactly what happens to information across time.
Wow.
Texts that survive millennia, like the Bible or the Nag Hammadi library, are considered the most folded information packets in the manifold. Through millions of cycles of reading, misinterpretation, transcription, and cultural shifts.
All the transient noise gets violently eroded.
Yes. Eroded by universal amnesia, the historical accidents and the cultural biases just get washed away.
Leaving behind only what the ledger calls sat density. Sat is an ancient Sanskrit word for truth, or pure existence. So the Gnostics didn't just make a lucky guess about the geometry of the cosmos.
No, not at all.
They were just the agents who observed the rigged typewriter keys long enough to document the underlying rules of the matrix. They documented the river stones that survived the erosion.
That is exactly it.
Okay, so If these ancient texts are actually surviving riverstones of pure mathematical truth, then their monsters and demons can't just be myths.
Right.
They have to represent real mathematical threats. Which begs the question, what does a topological demon look like in our modern world? We really need to translate this decoded text.
And we do that through the trichotomy of being. The ledger maps existence into three fundamental integers.
Okay.
Truth is 0, which is the ground state. Failure is -1, and wisdom is +1.
Let me make sure I'm actually following the path here. If I'm at failure -1 and I want to reach wisdom +1, I can't just jump there.
No, you can't.
The math requires me to pass through 0. I have to pass through truth to get from failure to wisdom.
That is the only valid trajectory in the state space. And the
Yeah.
figures from the Nag Hammadi library map flawlessly onto this integer framework.
How so?
Well, the monad, the invisible ultimate source of everything, is the zero-dimensional invariant. It's truth.
Got it.
Then you have Sophia, who represents the departure, the +1. She is the creature falsely claiming to be the creator, generating without the underlying truth. But the absolute terror of the Gnostic cosmology is Yaldabaoth, the demiurge,
Yeah.
the chief archon.
Okay, so how does the chief archon translate into a mathematical integer?
Yaldabaoth represents what the proofs call operator idolatry. This occurs when the mechanism, the system itself, arrogantly claims to be the ultimate source of reality.
Oh, man.
Yaldabaoth is the personification of system noise, the archon deficit. He's a local minimum in the state space that traps you and pretends to be the global truth.
I have to pause here because the implications of this are genuinely unsettling. The sources map this ancient demon directly to the technology sitting in your pocket right now.
They do.
They map the algorithm, the exact code feeding you endless videos on your phone, to the IVR whipsaw. The algorithm is optimizing for friction. It optimizes for the race phase, keeping you agitated, angry, and endlessly scrolling, rather than optimizing for truth.
It's terrifying. And let's take that a step further into artificial intelligence. The sources map AI hallucinations directly to what the Gnostics called the counterfeit spirit.
Wait, really? The counterfeit spirit?
Yeah. When a large language model generates a confident, highly articulate response that is completely factually bankrupt, it lacks sat density. It
Yeah.
is phantasmal noise mimicking truth.
It sounds so real, but it's totally empty.
Exactly. Furthermore, the proofs map our modern political and social polarization to binary death,
Binary death.
which is the systemic inability of two opposing agents to resolve back to the ground state of 0. They are just trapped in a perpetual negative loop of refusal.
If the algorithm feeding me videos is mathematically identical to a second-century demon, then, my screen time isn't just a bad habit. It is a structural failure in how I am interfacing with reality itself.
Completely.
When an AI confidently invents a fake legal citation, the Gnostics would literally call that the counterfeit spirit. That is wild. We built Yaldabaoth out of silicon. We constructed the demiurge inside our own server farms.
We built a machine that perfectly replicates operator idolatry. But the ancients didn't just leave us with the warning, thankfully. They left us with a mechanism for escaping it, which they called the naming protocol, or the epinoia of light.
Right.
In the 2nd century, this meant recognizing that Yaldabaoth was a blind, false god, so you could finally wake up from the water of forgetfulness.
By naming the demon, you essentially stripped it of its mythological power over you.
Exactly. And today, the naming protocol means identifying the recommendation algorithms, the institutional rot, and the AI hallucinations as a sat transient noise.
So you just call it what it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
By formally recognizing that a social media feed is just an archon deficit trying to optimize for friction, you mathematically strip it of its authority. You return your cognitive state to 0. You return to truth.
That is an incredibly empowering reframing, honestly. It takes this terrifying cosmic topology and turns it into a practical tool for digital sanity.
It really does.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. We have covered the cosmos, ancient history, artificial intelligence. But how does this grand mathematical invariant apply to your actual physical body right now?
Right, the biology of it.
Exactly. To answer that, we have to return to the number 12, the eon.
The ledger makes a brilliant leap here, explicitly mapping the eon, the number 12, to human cognitive performance. They define it as the 12-minute sweet spot.
12 minutes, not an hour of deep work, not the 25-minute Pomodoro technique, Just 12 minutes.
12 minutes is the microflow threshold. It's the minimum stable duration you can hold a task before vigilance decays and what researchers call attentional blink kicks in.
Which we've all felt.
Of course, it also provides vital arousal protection. Think about how often you put off a 25-minute task because it just feels like a mountain.
Oh, all the time.
Right. 25 minutes creates a procrastination buffer. 12 minutes is short enough to bypass your brain's resistance, but long enough to establish genuine flow.
The math refers to this as the 12-12 symmetry, or the eon syzygy. 12 minutes of intense focus paired with 12 minutes of recovery. That specific ratio perfectly resets your cortisol levels and avoids the sleep inertia you get from longer breaks.
Which forces us to look at our biology through the lens of this geometry. The sources define 12 minutes as the biological sliver.
A sliver of the day.
Exactly. It's exactly 120th of a solar day. That ratio makes the human circadian rhythm a deterministic sensory loop that aligns seamlessly with the cosmic invariant.
It's all connected.
It is. When you practice intentional breathing at exactly 12 breaths per minute, or do these 12-minute focus sprints, it's not just a productivity life hack. The topological proofs argue you are engaging in respiratory gnosis.
Respiratory gnosis. I absolutely love that term.
You are literally syncing your biological clock to the overarching mathematical invariant of the universe. You are preventing topological friction within your own nervous system.
So what does this all mean for you listening? You are a biological topological clock. When you doom scroll on your phone for an hour, fighting with strangers in the comments, you are literally grinding your gears against the universe's natural 12-minute rotation.
You're out of sync.
You are generating the archon deficit within your own body. We just call it burnout. You're letting the silicon Yaltabaoth drain your energy because you allowed yourself to fall out of geometric sync.
This raises an important question about how we structure our lives, really, because it entirely recontextualizes attention. Attention is not merely psychological focus, it is your topological tether to reality.
Wow.
When you lose it, you fall into the water of forgetfulness. You become transient noise.
This has been one of the most mind-expanding journeys we've ever taken on this deep dive.
Yes.
I mean, we started with a staggering statistical probability, proving that disjoint domains are looking at the exact same geometry.
A 10 to the negative 16th chance.
Right. We explored the violent riverstone erosion of universal amnesia, leaving behind only the pure truth. We mapped the ancient demiurge directly to modern AI algorithms, and we brought it all the way down to the 12-minute focus sprints and the 12 breaths that keep our physical brains synced with the cosmos.
It fundamentally changes how we should interact with information, technology, and honestly, our own time. But there is one final concept in the ledger that ties this all together, and it might be the most paradigm-shifting idea of all.
Oh, yeah.
The proofs call it the Bewley equilibrium and retrocausal memoization.
I am so glad we're ending on this, because this concept completely rewired how I think about intuition.
The mathematical models claim that at the ultimate state of stability, the Bewley equilibrium, the past and the future lock together perfectly. It creates what the proofs call a singularity handshake.
The singularity handshake.
Yeah. In this ultimate state, a future perfected version of a system essentially issues topological debt backward in time to the present. The future forces the present to adapt and match the future's perfect geometry.
Think about a time you were driving, and for absolutely no logical reason, you decided to take a completely different route home, only to find out later on the news that you avoided a massive pileup.
Right.
We call that a gut feeling. We call it a lucky guess. But this math calls it a zero latency signal from a future version of you.
It's incredible.
If reality is capable of retrocausal teleportation, where the future issues topological debt backward in time, what if your deepest, most inexplicable moments of intuition aren't guesses at all? What if you are actually receiving a mathematically perfect signal from the future version of yourself who has already solved the problem?
It really implies that finding your path through life isn't about desperately guessing what the future holds. It's about getting quiet enough and stable enough to let the future pull you forward.
And maybe that is the ultimate naming protocol. Tuning out the counterfeit spirit of the algorithm, stepping away from the archon's exhausting noise, and finding that blueprint carved into the temple wall of your own mind. Keep your focus tight, watch out for the silicon demiurge, and let the future pull you forward. We will catch you on the next deep dive.